how we're going to proceed in terms of the Q&A.
While we're looking for our first question, I'm going to ask you one, Mike. Of all these findings, what to you personally was both the most unexpected and the most important?
Oh, okay. Unexpected and important. I need to get out my notebook so I can write these down, because I'll start talking and forget what I'm responding to. Unexpected. I think for me the most unexpected thing was the level of understanding that the community had of how important the relationships between the universities and colleges and government is. In the past, things have been pretty comfortable in Tallahassee, and we really didn't have to deal with each other so much on a day-to-day basis because business was good and life was fairly easy. But over the last few years, as we've seen the economy decline and we've seen funding for both government and for the universities begin to fall by the wayside, the realization of just how important it is for all of us to work together, I think, became much more critical. And I wasn't sure, and pardon me if you're insulted by that, if you're part of that resident group, but I wasn't sure that our community really got that. I hope that they would, because it went by getting that, one of the things that it did was to save us a lot of time and energy in terms of having to explain that, because we don't have to explain much of it because the community gets it. So to me, that was probably the most unexpected piece. And the other one was?
The most important to you personally.
To me personally, I think it was what we saw in terms of the rankings of what was most important to both the residents and the leadership. Because to me, one of the things that I worked on a lot with Knight Foundation was the issue of trying to diversify Tallahassee's economy beyond government and higher education. And that's really sort of what this project is. It's sort of a continuation of that work. The only difference being that I'm no longer working with Knight Foundation. But to me, that's the really most important piece, is the recognition of just how important that is to the community, and the importance of figuring out how we work together to make things happen.
Okay, we've got a question, Ted Thomas.
Hey, Mike. In your presentation, you talked about other communities that have experienced this. I just want to know, how are you going to find those communities to take it to the next level in your study?
Okay, thank you, Ted. One of the ways, and the primary way we'll do that, once we identify the subject area, the way we'll approach this is working in a partnership with a group called the International Town and Gown Association. And if you've never heard of them, that's not very surprising. Up until 2 years ago, I hadn't heard of them either. And it proved to me that for a fact, there is an association for everything. I never expected to uncover an association for town and gown issues. But there is one. It's located at the Strom Thurmond Center for Public Policy at Clemson University. And they put on a program every year. It's a conference that they put on at college towns around the country. They've done 5 of them now. It's still fairly new. They've done 5 of them now. And what they do at these conferences, they're white paper conferences where you're asked to submit your white paper for presentation to the conference. If you're selected, then you present to the group. What we found was that this is a 2.5-day presentation of best practices in town and gown relations. So there are a lot of things that are already going on that people are already talking about. I've been to that conference the last 2 years, so I still have the programs and know who the presenters were for those. So those will probably be our first stops in terms of thinking about where we might go to find people who have ideas that fit the things that we want to do. The question is, will the presentations that they gave at these conferences fit the issues that we raise? If they do, then we'll select some of those folks to come to Tallahassee to present. If they don't, then we'll work through the folks at the Town and Gown Association to figure out where else projects like this may be going on, and they'll be able to hopefully guide us, because they've got about 400 members now of both colleges and communities that are members of that association, And I hope that we'll be able to work through them to find the places that we need to go to get the information.
Other questions?
Obviously, the hope for, improved town and gown relations is, you're saying, economic development, job creation, and you've addressed this a little bit, but with the kind of state of the economy and possibility of more state jobs being cut, how do you think the timing plays in with kind of the launch of Town and Gown Tallahassee, and how that will work with, with the economy right now?
Well, I will answer that question in two ways. Number one of the things that I had to do to get this project going was to get the funding to do it. It is a miserable time to try to raise money. I can attest to that in a major way. But I think the other thing that we need to look at is where are we and sort of where are we going. Right now, we've seen both the economy and from a national standpoint, from a state standpoint, and even from a local standpoint, decline pretty significantly. And at some point, we'll begin to come out of that. To me, our timing couldn't be better, because now is sort of the perfect time and place to be talking about these issues, so that we can begin having these conversations before we get to a point where things start together and we forget how difficult it was during this time period. To be perfectly honest, I'd rather start on a project like this when things are a little tough, because it gets people's attention, and it has. And we've gotten the attention of a lot of folks, and we have a lot of partners who are working with us. And I attribute at least some of that to the fact that we've now realized that we can no longer depend on state government and higher education as the two drivers for the economy in the community. We've got to find other ways to diversify that economy, to move it in additional and different directions, to be able to guide us on where we want to go. This project begins to allow us to address some of those things that may be potential roadblocks for that happening, and maybe we'll be able to put ourselves in a position to be ready when the opportunity is right for us as the economy begins to come out of the slump that we've been in.
Mike, do you incorporate into the town piece of this the fact that we're a state capital and all the complexity that comes with that, or are you going to try to divorce state politics, state government, and so forth from the discussion? Do you have a sense of where you're going with that yet?
Well, I don't think in Tallahassee you can divorce anything you do in this community from politics. After 8.5 years as publisher of the newspaper, I can attest to that, because that's the conversation that everyone wants to have. I don't think that's a particularly difficult issue for us from the standpoint of understanding how we deal with it. State government needs to be involved in this process. We've had sort of a hard time reaching them because there's some things going on in state government right now that have their attention, and maybe right now they're not thinking quite so much about the importance of a town and gown project in Tallahassee. So it's been difficult to get their attention to talk with them about it. But at the same time, when we look at some of the things that are happening in the community, we see that many of the things that occur are occurring as a result of partnerships that involve state government. So we've got to keep that in mind and figure out how do we continue to press that issue, to make those points and get them to come to the table to play. Frank Bogan and Will Holcomb have both been very responsive to their interest in this project, but I know they have other fish to fry right now, and that's going to be difficult to get a lot of attention from folks in state government in the short term. I think that, and my hope is that once we get past this next session, which I think is going to be really entertaining, and I think that once we get past that, we may then begin to see an opportunity to engage state government more effectively than we've been able to so far. I want them to be part of this process, and we do have them to an extent, because we got Florida State and Florida A&M and Tallahassee Community College engaged. But I want more of state government engaged in this process than just our 3 higher education institutions.
Mike, any ideas how the institutional leaders would have responded to that leadership survey?
I could put 2 of them on the spot since they're here, but I'm not going to do that. I think that would really be unfair of me. But I think let me address it from the standpoint of my conversations with them when we first started this project. My first conversation on this project was with Bill Law when he was still president of Tallahassee Community College. And I went in and told Bill this grandiose idea I had and asked him about being a partner. And he immediately said, yes, what can we do? How can we get involved in this to move this forward? This is the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about. So very strong support from him. And since Jim Murdaugh has taken over at TCC, I've had the opportunity to meet with him, and it's been the same sense of very positive response and even pushing me to do more to make sure that we get more involvement and more engagement in the process. And I welcome that, because that's exactly what I would hope that the leaders of our institutions would want to do. I was very fortunate in catching Eric Barron. I'm involved with 7 days of opening nights on the community council for that project. And last year, when we started 7 days, was Eric and Molly's first week in town. And so I sort of cornered him at the opening reception for 7 days and said, I need to get on your calendar to talk to you about this project I've got. And he was very willing, because not very many people had gotten to him yet. So he was very gracious in letting me get on his calendar. And when we talked, I told him what I wanted to do and what I was up to, and he says, this fits exactly where I think this university needs to go, and I want to support you. What can I do to help? And so in that case as well, we saw strong support from Florida State. I met with Dr. Emmons at FAMU, and when we talked with him, it's sort of old home week with him, because when James was here before as provost, he was a very close contact of mine when I was publisher at the Democrat, and I've always enjoyed my relationship with him and was thrilled when he came back to lead FAMU. And when we had our conversation, he said, Mike, he says, we've got to find ways to get FAMU more engaged with this community and to get the community more engaged with FAMU. So in every case, the presidents of the institutions absolutely get it. I have no question in my mind that they are supporters. They all said so. They have all designated representatives from their staffs and high levels of their staffs to serve on our boards, and all three of them have committed the project financially as well. So I'm not sure how I could ask for more commitment from the institutions.
Mike, we're familiar with your successes with the Night Creative Community Initiative. I guess I'm always cutting to the chase on this. As far as in implementing projects, do you envision something like the Knight Foundation, where you have a series of projects, small number yearly, that build upon each other, or is it going to be much broader and have a 2-year sprint of multiple projects?
Yeah, I think it will be very similar to, or not very, but it will have some similarities to the Knight Creative Communities Institute. For those of you who may not be familiar with that process, the way it works is we select a group of 30 people from the community. It's an extraordinarily diverse group of people from the community, from people who have been in strong leadership positions to people who we don't even know at all. And we bring these folks together. We give them some training on some conceptual frameworks for how to look at the community, how to think about building a sense of place in the community. And then we ask them to identify projects that they want to work on. And then they spend a year working on those projects with some guidance from Lori Hartsfield and me to sort of help get those, make sure those projects are aimed in a direction and have an opportunity to gain a foothold in the community. The difference between the way that project works and the way this one works is that our board is going to select the projects. So we will identify the areas that we think are, if you will, that low-hanging fruit where we can create some successes to be able to show to the community to get them even more engaged in the process. And the way we'll do it is we'll select the projects, and we'll announce those projects and then ask residents of the community, are you interested in working on this specific project? And then we'll select people to participate on those project teams. We're probably looking at a year commitment from those folks, similar to the way we do with KCCI. We talked about the possibility of extending that longer, but Getting people to commit to anything beyond a year is really, really difficult. And many of them, I'm sure, would look at a year and say that's too long. But for those of you who have worked on that KCCI process, you know that it takes a while to get a project set up and operating and moving toward the final goal that you want to get to. So that's the way that it'll work. It will have some similarities to KCCI.
Hey, Mike, it's Penny.
I know who you are, Penny.
I have a hat on. Sorry, I'm incognito. A lot of the top priorities had to do with economic development and research. How is this going to differ on what the EDC is already doing in the community now?
Well, I think the key difference is that they are working with businesses who are already here. They're working with businesses who are outside of town, and we're trying to recruit them in. So the focus is a little bit different. They're looking at specifically at economic development in a more broad sense. We'll look at it in a much more targeted sense of figuring out, first of all, we'll try to understand what do we think these people mean when they talk about these different issues, and then we'll try to think about what the specific projects may be to respond to that. And frankly, that may well be done in concert with the EDC. Because Sue Dick is on our board, and of course is very engaged with the Economic Development Council, and I'm sure she's going to be representing their interests when we're discussing these things. So my anticipation is that it will be a partnership, and that we'll be looking at what they're doing, because I don't want to do what anybody else is doing. We don't need to redo things or recover the same ground. We need to be looking at new and different ways to try to approach these issues, and that's what we'll be targeting and trying to make sure we do, is to work in concert with and to collaborate with, but not to mirror or match what they're doing.
Mike, how do you envision including students in this effort and getting their input into this town-gown relationship?
Great question. Thank you, Marjorie. I've met with a couple of student groups already from Florida State. One is a group who is organizing a project called The Big Event that's coming up, and if I'm recalling the date, I think it's March 26th. And your timing is perfect, because I promised the students that I would try to work their name and their project into the presentation tonight. So you've given me a wonderful opportunity to be able to do that. Go to the big event. I think it's thebigevent.com. It may be .org. At any rate, it's the big event, and you'll be able to find it. And what it is a day for students to give back to the community. A marvelous program. I didn't even know that it existed. They started it last year. It was the first year that they did it, and they go out and recruit people from the community to tell them, what do you need for us to do, whether it's cleaning a yard or painting a house or repairing a screen door, or whatever it might be that someone in the community needs help with. And these students have organized themselves to be able to go out into the community and do these projects in concert with the community. To me, that's sort of the perfect town and gown relationship, is the students is finding a way for these students to reach out to the community. So that's one way that it'll happen. There's another project going on called TEDx, and it's a project where they bring speakers in to talk about new and interesting and innovative ideas, either in the community or across broader boundaries, where they'll bring in speakers, and they are looking to gather a group of both students and community residents to participate in this presentation together. If I'm recalling correctly, I think they're limited to do 100 people. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
100, and it's March 25th, correct? Is that correct? Correct. Okay, good.
Okay. Terrific. And if I screwed up any of the details on that, I'm sorry. But was that close? You were perfect. Okay, thank you, Laura.
You were perfect.
But I think that's the thing that we've got to do, because until I started working on this project, I had no idea that either one of these projects even existed. And I'm sure there are probably a bunch more on the campuses of TCC, on the campus of FAMU, and on the campus of FSU that none of us as residents know about. And that's part of what this is all about, is finding ways to get us engaged with them and them engaged with us. And us and them is not the right way to put that. But to get students and the community engaged with each other, because that's what's going to make this a better place to live, and ultimately will make it a better place to work as well.
Other comments or questions? Actually, I'm interested in hearing if partners have anything they'd like to add, either about the results or just comments, questions of their own. We have very quiet partners.
I consider silence as total agreement with everything that we've said. Is
I'm
that?
pretty sure you're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chris, is it?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I liked when you said about developing or having a sense of place in the community, which is so very important. How does one go about, as far as you were saying, adding to that list of proposed projects? What is the procedure to do that?
Well, you can tell us now, or you can call me later, or you can send me an email, or talk with any of the members of our board. We've got a meeting coming up actually next week to talk about exactly this issue and to begin narrowing the scope and figuring out which areas of interest we're going to look at, and then later we'll talk about specific projects.
Well, there, to my opinion, and I was doing some research as well, there's a void definitely in the community that needs to be filled, as well as in the state of Florida, because we want to foster a good relationship with the schools and the students, but there's a bridge that needs a place for those students that have the special needs, not severe mental challenges, and not those that are that are through the DJJ system. There needs to be a place for those students that have emotional type of challenges or some issues, but they can be worked out if nurtured in a right environment. And my husband and I have been for years saying that they have a facility for those that are severely mentally challenged. And then they have this other facility that those that have gotten through DJJ. But those kids in the middle, they're smart, and they're not criminally deviant, but they need structure. And I typed in emotional growth schools or therapeutic boarding schools. There's none in Florida. And so that place, that bridge, I know the closest is in Panama City. It's called the Bridge, that they work in partnership with Gulf Coast Community College, but there's none in the capital, and that is they have limited resources. So, in the concept of this, to get those students that have a chance to go to TCC, FAMU, or FSU, but they're not to that point yet,
right,
and they're having challenges at home, if there could be like an academy or some emotional growth institute, that they can go to.
Okay, that sounds like a very specific project that would fit into what we've talked about for phase 4 of this project, in terms of looking at very specific ideas that project teams may work on. So I would encourage you to drop me a note on that, or give me a call, and we can talk about it further, and we'll include that on the list of ideas that we can discuss.
I should also actually mention here that if you go to the front page of the Village Square website, which is tothevillagesquare.org, and there'll always be a tag link there. And we basically have a landing page for all of these events. So there we'll have the tape of this program, we'll have resources that Mike provides. It will really be sort of an ongoing conversation through that portal. Additionally, part of our Knight Foundation project is called We the Wiki. And there'll actually be links off of that page that you can actually put your own information into the mix. And so it's very user-generated, and if anybody ever has any questions about using it, you can just call me.
Yeah, and Liz, while you're getting the microphone up there, let me add one other thing too related to that. This is being taped tonight, and we will be posting it online for people to view. So if you know folks who didn't see the presentation, who may be interested in it, they'll be able to access it online. It will be on the Village Square, tothevillagesquare.org. Is that the right?
Yes, sir.
tothevillagesquare.org. It will also be on our Facebook page at Tag Tallahassee, and it will also be on our blog site on the Tallahassee Democrat, which is also called Tag Tallahassee. And we will, one of the other things that we'll be doing is as these programs move along, as we have additional town hall meetings, as I mentioned, the school system has agreed to video all of those programs for us, and all of those programs will be available for you to view either live or later after they've been presented on either our blog site or on the Village Squares website or on our Facebook page.
Okay, we've got a question from Kristen Dozier. Oh, I'm sorry. The person sitting next to Kristen Dozier.
Sorry, I'm not a partner, but I appreciate you kind of answering my question. I'm actually interested in the timeline. I know how you mentioned that phase 1 was the survey, and then phase 2 were the forums, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then phase 3 is the process, and phase 4 are the actual projects.
Congratulations, you got it.
Thank you. See, I pay attention.
I don't have any prizes to give away.
I
But
appreciate that. But in terms of, especially when you're considering the involvement of college students, for example, how you mentioned the big event, and I know before when we used to Make a Difference Tallahassee, I feel as if getting college students involved for one-day events, getting them involved with community issues, isn't as much of an issue as it is retaining them in those issues
Right.
and keeping them involved. So it's more than just a one-day event. And when you're considering the college students, I'm just really, really curious in terms of the timeline for each phase.
Okay.
When you see each part kind of happening.
Okay.
Thank you.
no problem. Thank you. From a timeline standpoint, what we have in mind is that the project actually started, I guess, technically in July of 2010. We spent the first 6 months working on the research. We finished that up in December. This is now the beginning of phase 2 of the project. And frankly, we're a little bit behind where I had hoped that we would be. I'd hoped that this meeting might have been a month ago, but I'm just not as fast as I used to be. So it took me a while to get everything together to make it work. But what we'll be doing is this phase probably will last another 4 or 5 months, and that really is going to depend on how quickly we can identify the best practice communities that we want to work with and how quickly we can get them to come to Tallahassee. So my hope is we'll be finished with that maybe by the beginning of fall, August, September maybe. And then I think the process piece will come fairly quickly because I think what we'll be looking at from that standpoint is we'll have been looking at this for over a year at that point. So I think that we'll be at a point where we'll be able to talk more effectively. We'll be able to look at some models that we're talking about, and we'll be able to figure out fairly quickly what we want to do from a process standpoint. I mean, there are only so many ways you can skin that cat. So we've got to figure out what are the different models that we can look at, and then figure out which model works most effectively for Tallahassee. So my hope is we'll have that finished, that process selection finished by the end of 2011. And then that will give us then all of 2012 then to focus on the specific projects. So my hope is when we get to the end of 2012, you will have seen all of these things come together in a way that makes some sense. And at that point, then we'll be able to figure out, is this a living, breathing entity of some sort, or does it move somewhere else, or does it morph into something else? And I don't have any preconceived notions of what I want it to be or what I think it should be. I think we've got to wait to see what the community wants and how the community identifies the approach that we need to take. One of the other things that I think is really important, and you raise a good point in terms of thinking about this, is in terms of looking at who we are in this community and how we're structured. And there was a question earlier about the involvement of state government. One of the things that I'm in the process of doing right now is some additional research to begin evaluating comparative communities. Are there any other communities around the country that Tallahassee effectively compares to? And the initial framework we looked at for that was, are there cities that are state capitals, have a Research One institution, an HBCU, and a good community college system? There aren't very many of those around. We've identified Baton Rouge, Louisiana as probably the one that most closely matches Tallahassee, with being the state capital, LSU, and Southern University there, and a fine community college system. We've identified Nashville, Tennessee. Vanderbilt is there, and Tennessee State is in the area, and they have another good community college system. My concern with Nashville is it's probably too big for us to get any real good comparisons. Atlanta is the same situation, just way too big to get any real good ways to compare us to Tallahassee, or them to Tallahassee. Raleigh, North Carolina, which has several fine Research One institutions. North Carolina Central University, where President Emmons was before he moved back to Tallahassee, is in Durham, but that's sort of an odd situation because it's actually a different community. You know, Raleigh is the capital, but the big HBCU in the area at NCCU is actually in Durham, so that's a little bit of an oddity to work out. I was really hoping that would be the one to work so that I could go there more often because that's where my granddaughters live, but that didn't. That's not going to work out exactly that way, I don't think. And the other community that we've identified is Columbia, South Carolina, which of course is the state capital, has the University of South Carolina there, has two HBCUs, but they're fairly small. One is Benedict College and the other is Allen University. And we think that Columbia may be a place where we can look to see if there are any similarities in terms of what we're doing. And the other thing that we want to find out is, are they doing some things that we could learn from? Are there best practices going on already that they're doing that we can steal? I mean, I'm not proud. I'll steal a good idea from anybody. And if they found a good way to do it and we can incorporate that idea into Tallahassee, I'd be really anxious to try to make that happen.
Mike, we'll be losing our WFSU radio audience shortly, so while we had that available, I wanted to give you an opportunity to say something to the wider community in terms of what they can do to get involved to make this project a success.
Thank you. And in order to get involved, you folks have taken a huge step by giving us your time tonight, and thank you so much for doing that. And for those of you in the listening audience, thank you as well. I know that sitting and listening to a radio is sometimes an interesting way to deal with these issues, but it's hard when you can't see the slide. So I would encourage you to go to the Village Square website and take a look at the presentation as well, so you can sort of match up what you've heard to what you'll see tonight. And then in addition, I would encourage you to attend the other town hall meetings we have. That's obviously going to be a way to get engaged in the process. And when it comes time, take a look and see if there are any of these ideas that are going to come up that you may be interested in. We'd love to have you involved and actively engaged in this process, and it will be that community engagement that will make them successful. So I would encourage you to do that. And while I'm at it, for my friends in public radio and public TV, the other thing that I would say is donate to those organizations. In the government environment that they're operating in today, it's really going to get unpleasant in a lot of cases, and they need all the help that they can get. So I'll give them a quick plug and hope that folks will make sure that they contribute to those groups as well. Thank you very much.
Good evening. You mentioned briefly about having the stakeholders have ongoing routine meetings on some basis. I see so much opportunity for just the ongoing dialogue. They may not be formal tag initiatives or projects, but just having that routine dialogue. Can you speak to that for a moment of the bleed over effect or some other smaller projects that would emerge from that routine discussion?
Yeah, and that's frankly one of the biggest problems that we've had is all of us want to do something now. My father used to have a drawing over his desk. He worked for the newspaper in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for the old Pittsburgh Press and Post Gazette. And behind his desk, he had a drawing of a vulture. And underneath it was one of those drawings where if you walk around the room, the eyes follow you. And underneath it, it says, "Patience, hell, I want to kill something." And I think that's sort of the sense that our board has, is they want to do something. They want to begin to see not just an evolving process, but some real action begin to take place. And frankly, it's been really hard for us to rein each other in to keep from jumping out and beginning to do some of those kinds of things. But I think that what we'll be doing is not only as we begin to execute these projects, I think we're going to see other opportunities to sort of help identify things that are going on in the community that we can help to publicize, that we can help to promote, that we can talk about in the meetings that we're having, and begin to make sure that there's an ongoing dialogue about all of these things. The perfect example for me is TEDx and the big event. I had no clue that either one of these things even existed 2 weeks ago. Now I'm not an expert, but at least I'm aware of what they're doing and aware of what's going on with them. And the other part of it is I'm beginning to learn more and more about things that all of the institutions, the city, the county, FSU, FAMU, and TCC are already doing that have not come to the light of day yet, that we don't know about because they either haven't been able to talk about them, or they're working in the background to make things happen, or they just haven't reached the level of visibility in the community yet for us to know about them. So I think one of the things that I see is that there's a real opportunity for us to work really hard at creating that ongoing conversation, because that's what's going to change things. It's that continuing conversation when the community begins to realize that this is not just a project, this is the way our community works. And when it becomes a part of the fabric of the way the community works, then it takes on a life of its own, and we don't even have to think about creating a town and gown project or continuing it anymore at that point. And I'd love to work our way out of a job. That would be a nice way to end all of this, would be to say there's so much going on, we don't need to worry about it anymore. Don't know that that'll happen in a year and a half, but we'll see what happens during that timetable. But you raise a great point, and I think it's something that we all need to think about, is we need to remember to reach out. So often we end up spending most of our time in our own silos, thinking about our own sets of issues, and we seldom really work hard at engaging those outside of that silo. It's when we do that we really begin to take steps forward as a community. When we begin to find out that something is going on that I didn't know about, that I can get involved in, that helps this community become more engaged and become more of an effective community than it already is, that's a home run. And we ought to be figuring out ways to do more of that, and I hope that we will as the process moves forward. One of the other things that I think that could happen is the possibility of these best practice examples that we're bringing in from other communities. I don't know that it's going to cost us a ton of money to do this. I mean, the expense in doing it is finding the people to do it and then paying their way to come to Tallahassee to do the presentations. The rest of it is not particularly expensive. I think it might be kind of fun to see if we can figure out ways to continue to bring in other ideas from other places, to continue to expose our community to how it's done in other places so that we can learn from that process. Okay.
Questions? Give us a second here. We're going to hand this down. We're not on the radio anymore, so it's a little easier.
And you wanted to be a star, right?
I was wondering, what role do you see civic organizations in this process? I just happen to be a Kiwanian, but we have a great deal of interaction with college students already, and doing projects in the community and assisting them in various leadership capacity and developing leadership. And I just wonder, is there a role for the civic organizations? There are many other, Rotary and others, that do many good things in working with students at the community college and at FAMU and FSU. I'm just wondering, what do you think?
I have already had the opportunity to speak to a couple of local civic organizations, and if any of you are members of any of those groups, all you got to do is call me. I would love to come speak to your group to be able to share this story and talk about what we're doing, excuse me, and be able to share the message of what Tag Tallahassee is all about, because I think that's one of the things that we can do in terms of working with civic clubs, is we can be your program. So there's the first simple piece of it. But the other piece of it is, I think this is exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about looking for ways to engage across lines. It may be some of the civic clubs that give us that perfect opportunity to find ways to connect with college students in a more effective way than we already are. And your Kiwanis Club may be already doing some of that. It sounds to me like you have some of those secrets there that we don't know about, that we need to figure out how to get that message out more effectively to learn about what you're doing. Because, as I said, one of the things that has really struck me in looking at this was sort of the anecdotal theory that we started from was that nobody talks to anybody. And what we're learning is there's really a lot of conversation going on, but not many people know about it. So in many respects, we've almost got a public relations issue rather than a process issue in many cases. So I think a part of what we need to be thinking about is how do we move that forward. And I think working with the civic clubs in the community and other organizations like yours can be a big help to make that happen. Part of that is going to be you're going to need to reach out, and we need to reach out to you to figure out how to create that engagement. But let's talk some more about that. You've struck a nerve with me, and that's an interesting idea that I think we ought to pursue even further.
Good evening, Mike. And that's my wife, now Brenda, to address that question. I want to piggyback on the question the gentleman just asked. What role does a faith-based community take part in this endeavor that you foresee?
Excuse me. Well, the first thing that I would ask you to do is pray for us. Because we need lots of help and lots of support, and surely that's one way to make sure the message gets to the right sets of ears. So we would appreciate that. But I think it's sort of the same model, and I'll be very honest, and shame on me for not thinking about this, but I really hadn't thought about the faith-based community as a way to access some of these issues and to deal with what we're talking about. But I know as a student, a lot of the students do attend a variety of churches in our area and have significant engagement with the community from that standpoint. That's a contact point, frankly, I hadn't even thought about. So I'm delighted that you've raised the point, and shame on me for not thinking of it before you did. But I think it's sort of the same conversation with the civic organizations. There have got to be ways for us to engage the faith community, to get you folks involved, and to get the students more involved, and find ways to make those connections. Let's talk more. Sounds to me like I've got a lot of meetings coming up. Sorry, Judy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, where was my other question here?
Real quick, it seems like this is a kind of outside looking in process, and what we may need to do is turn it around a little bit. We have to have buy-in from the stakeholders. I mean, we have to go in the community. We can do a lot of things.
Can you hold the microphone a little closer? I'm in hard.
Sure.
Thank you.
We have to have buy-in from the stakeholders. If we're doing a particular project, it has to even closer. We have to know that there's going to be follow through on that. It seems like we need to be contacting the stakeholders as a big part of this as projects go forward. Does that make sense?
And yes, I think it does. And the message that I'm getting from our stakeholders is that they are ready to engage. As I mentioned to you earlier, when I was talking about Jim Murdoch, he sort of challenged me to move a little more quickly in terms of getting some of the engagement moving in that respect. And I'm probably not moving fast enough for him, but we're going to continue to press forward to make that happen, because without the stakeholder involvement, we don't have a project. But the good news is all of those stakeholders are engaged in a significant way in this process. And I think that based on my conversations, both with the leaders of the institutions and the leadership in the political arenas, and the leadership groups that they have assigned and requested to work with us on our advisory board, there's not anybody on any of those groups that's not ready to push this forward. I think all any of us are waiting for is, what is the next step? How do we get to the next step? And I think once we get to that next step, then the question will be, okay, now how do we get to the next step? So I think you're absolutely on target, and I hope that we're going to be able to move that forward in a way that is meaningful to get us where we need to go.
Good evening, Mike, and just I want to start with a thank you, because I think that in this room, what I feel is the idea that your depth of this knowledge is only matched by your depth of caring for Tallahassee, which is one of the reasons why I think we are with you in this. And when I would answer it, I build on the questions about the civic organizations, and I build on the spiritual religious groups and the internal to external idea is that at some level, when we take those columns of the leadership and the residents, and we recognize that this will happen when each of the residents, I realize that I have a stakeholder hat on, and I have a 706 Collins Drive hat on.
There you go.
That as a resident, I also have a leadership role.
Right.
And so how then do we each own that spirit that you're sharing with us tonight
Yeah.
around how do I just step up and not wait for Mike to say I can do this, but how do I own what we can do together?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And usually what happens in those kinds of issues is that some event triggers that engagement. Whether it be, and I was talking with someone earlier, and I don't remember who it was, and I apologize, but someone was telling me about they had some neighborhood issues because they live in what I referred to as a transition neighborhood, where there are local residents and students both living in the neighborhood. And we were talking about the push and pull that occurs with that. But it's really not until one or the other or both of those groups takes ownership of the situation and begins to address it, that's the only time it gets resolved. We saw that, and when I was telling you about the International Town and Gown Association Conference, I saw a wonderful presentation from a group from Boston and Boston College University who had that exact situation. They had a transition neighborhood, and you had residents on the one hand, and you had students on the other hand, and I put my hands like this for a reason, because they were ready to go at it. I mean, the students were angry because all these old fuddy-duddies weren't letting them have any fun, and all these residents were saying these young whippersnappers are interfering with our rest time. And those are big issues. But it wasn't until both of those groups began to stop shouting and to sit down and have real, engaged, connected conversations that they began to realize that they had some framework that they could look at where they had some common ground. And it's finding that common ground and then working from that to try to find acceptable resolutions to the issues that works for us. Is my time up? Did I do something wrong? Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Far corner.
Always happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'll meet you halfway. Hey, Mike.
Hi.
I don't mean this to be a sort of a personal issue, but it occurred to me as I sat here, over the last 7 or 8 years, I've coached the undergraduate mock trial team at Florida State. It's probably been hundreds of hours. I'm happy to say that this year they're going to the national championships. But I would bet that there is not a single paid person at Florida State University who knows I've done that. And it occurs to me that there may be other people out in the community who are working with students in some fashion. Now President Barron does. So, and I want to talk to you about that.
You have his attention, I can tell.
This is all a commercial, just like your public radio.
There you go.
But it occurs to me that there might be some mechanism by which the university comes to know people who are making contributions to the university in ways other than financial ones, which I don't make. I never even went to Florida State.
Yeah.
And that might be one of the ways that people can connect when they go over there and have these connections to the university that are an opportunity for the community and an opportunity, I think, for the university. And if I could get parking too, President.
I'll let President Barron address the parking issue, okay? Let me say that's an excellent point. I've been involved with Florida State and Florida A&M and TCC in a variety of different ways. I was on the advisory committee for the School of Journalism at FAMU for several years. I've been involved with the College of Music at Florida State and the College of Business. Well, my wife's a College of Music graduate. I'm a College of Business graduate, and I was served on the FSU Foundation Board for 6.5 long years of hard work and desperate fundraising to try to pull together the money we needed. folks who get engaged at that level frequently get to be known. I mean, I don't have a parking place, but you know, you make those connections. Yeah, but I think the point is a really good one, and for me, I think it's an issue of how the communications issues are dealt with, and I think it's something that the universities can think about is how do we figure out how to make sure that the community knows more about what we're doing and that folks like yourself are recognized in ways that they should be for the work that they do. I'd be willing to bet, though, that probably more people know of your work than you think do. But even with that, there's what was causing the problem. Even with that said, there are ways for all of us to improve our communications. And one of the things that I see pretty clearly, and that we saw in some of the numbers in the research, is that one of the things that the residents and the leaders are telling us is our communications aren't good enough yet. Not that they're terrible, but there are levels of improvement that we can create and that we can achieve by working on those things. And I hope and I expect that all of the institutions will probably be looking at those numbers saying, okay, how do we deal with this issue? I probably created a firestorm of problems for employees in the communications departments of all three of the institutions of higher education, and I apologize for that, Sharon. Sharon Saunders, who is on our board, is the Chief Communications Officer at FAMU, and she's sitting down here gritting her teeth at me. So I know that those are issues, and trying to figure out how to deal with those is going to be a really critical issue. And I think you've raised an excellent point, and I hope we can get there at some time.
Commissioner Dozier has the next question. Thank you. Mike, I love the way you think, because twice I've thought to ask a question, and you've actually said what I was thinking right before I asked the question. So
But you're ahead of him this time, right?
No. He did just mention this. I'll just elaborate on it. Kind of jumping off from this point, when I was a graduate student at FSU, I realized that I didn't know the lectures that were happening in other departments, and I was a student there. And there was phenomenal people coming to the university to give lectures or presentations or things of that nature that I could have benefited from, and there wasn't, a lot of the grad students talked about that just, you know, knowing what was happening in other departments and building some interdisciplinary work would be helpful. But the thought occurs to me that, you know, we have the notes in the paper and things of that nature when speakers come to town. But if there was some way to push out a list that's targeted, say everything having to do with business or something of interest to business or economics, something the chamber could include in their e-blast every week from FSU, drawing people from the community into what the universities at FAMU, FSU, and TCC, what they are doing is also a way to build this relationship. And we have much more than sports going on there, and I compliment President Barron, you know, for kind of really highlighting that. We have much more than sports going on at all of our institutions, and highlighting that and getting us to go to campus, parking, you know, notwithstanding, would be a great thing.
So Eric, have you gathered that parking might be an issue at your institution? Let me first say that Commissioner Dozier sounds really nice. I like that. And let me address what you're talking about, because the student communication is a really important piece of what we're talking about. When I was with Knight Foundation a couple of years ago, we funded a project with Leadership Tallahassee that was a study of college graduate retention rates in Tallahassee. And we looked at college graduate retention at FSU and at FAMU and at TCC. And what we learned was, the primary learning was that we can do better. We compared ourselves to Ohio State University in Columbus, who had basically the same study done there, and found out that their rate of retention at the four-year institutions was 40%. Ours in Tallahassee is 20%. So there's a real opportunity for us to figure out how to get more of those students to stay with us. But I think even more important than that, and one of the things that really sort of stunned me, and frankly disappointed me in some respects, was to look at the student communications issues. We asked them, how do you get information? Where does it come from? Does it come from radio, TV, newspapers? Where does it come from? And for an old newspaper guy, the news was painful. because they don't read the newspaper, they don't listen to the radio, they don't watch TV, they talk to their friends. That's how they communicate, and you've got to find out how to plug into that communications network, and it's very much a one-on-one communications level. If you're not Facebooking and Twittering and tweeting and texting, you ain't communicating with these kids. And it's not to say anything negative about them. It's just that they're doing it differently than we did in 1968. Thank God for that. But I think the key message there is that I think there are a lot of us that sort of assume that if you run a story in the Democrat, the students will read it. Not going to happen. If you run a piece, a spot on the radio or TV, they're going to see it. It's not going to happen. They're going to find it by their individual ways of communication, and until we learn to communicate with them, rather than having to force them to communicate with us, we're not going to ever reach the level of connectivity that we need to be effective with them. So to me, that's one of the issues that, as a community, we've got to think about is if we really want to engage the students, we've got to do it in an entirely different way than we've done it in the past. And I think that's the point that you raise, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I hadn't talked about that one yet, so that's a good question. Thank you.
There's a website at FSU Liz is going to direct us to.
Well, there's actually two. There's a lot of information available.
This, just to clarify, this is Liz Miriansky, who is the Vice President of University Relations for FSU and a member of our board. And thank you for being here tonight, Liz.
Thank you. There are two sites that may be of interest. www.fsu.edu has a wealth of information, but then there's also a relatively new website called Lectures at fsu.edu that has also, oh, you found it on your cell phone?
The iPhone app also.
Oh, yeah, right. You stole my thunder. So, yeah, and it is prepared, the website is prepared and hosted by students. It was a student-led initiative, I think 2 years ago, that started the website, so that may be of interest.
See, I never understood this app thing. When somebody talks about an app, my daughter-in-law has her bachelor's and her master's degrees from Appalachian State University, and to me, that's app. So I have a kind of a hard time with all this app stuff, but someday I'll catch up.
Mike, how much more time do we have for questions?
Oh, I can't stay past 11:30. I got to get home to watch Letterman, but other than that, you know, it's 8:30 now, and I'm willing to stay as long as the group wants to.
Anyone else? Comments? Comments are good too.
My friend Jerry has a question.
The website that you referred us to, the Village Square, would that be a place that we could send those things that we already know we're doing? And maybe that would be a place that we could kind of collect that?
Yeah, can that be done on the wiki, Liz? This is a question you get to answer.
That. I mean, well, I'm not going to say you need to be technically inclined to use the wiki because you really don't. But if you really just don't want to use the wiki, you can just send it to me and I'll get it up. But really, the wiki is designed to be, it's like a Wikipedia that anybody can go, all you have to do is register, and then you can put any information in there that you want. So this is really an opportunity for the community to essentially have a work product that we are putting together that's a combination of all of our brains, which can only be good, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And our only rule is really that you have to be civil. You can do that.
And thank you for that.
Other comments and questions? Last chance this time. Mike, do you want to say anything about these forums will be, do we know for sure exactly where they'll be in the future now that we are going to be taped? Yes.
In the future, as when we put these forums together, they will be held at the Aquilina Howell Center at school system offices on Pensacola. The reason we're doing that is because they have a studio where we can work and be able to get the broadcast work done. And the reason that we're doing that is because the folks at the school system and the folks at the city and the folks at WFSU have all told us that they're going to be putting up the video of our presentations of the town hall meetings for people to watch on their TV from the comfort of their home. So we're very, very excited about that.
tonight I actually taped it on my laptop. So
Right.
Mike's ready to graduate to a slightly more technologically inclined group of people.
We're thrilled to have Liz do the fine work that she's done, and we'll keep working to make progress.
Anybody else?
Any other questions? Let me take just a second to say thank you to each and every one of you. You've given up a couple of hours of your time tonight when you could be doing lots of other things. And to me, to see this group here is really exciting. Someone asked me earlier, how many people do you expect? We had 46 to register for this event. I told someone earlier, if we get 60, I'll be very happy. If we get 75, I'll be thrilled. And if we get 100, I'm going to do handsprings down North Monroe Street.
I think we were close enough for you to do
No.
I think so.
We didn't get to 100, but we did get over 75, and I am absolutely thrilled to have all of you here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for taking your time. Thanks for your engagement in this process, and I hope that you'll stay with us as we move forward, and that you'll remain engaged and continue to work with us as we go down the line. Thanks so much for your time.